Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the chaotic heart of ancient Rome, a city that ruled much of the known world but struggled to control its own streets. When most people imagine Rome, they picture magnificent temples, towering monuments, victorious generals, and emperors wrapped in glory. But for the average Roman citizen, daily life was far less glamorous. Rome was crowded, noisy, dangerous, and often completely unpredictable. By the 1st century BCE, the city had become the largest urban center in the Mediterranean world. More than 1 million people lived within its boundaries, creating a human sea that flowed endlessly through narrow streets and overcrowded neighborhoods. Every morning began with noise. Merchants opened their stalls before sunrise. Blacksmiths hammered metal. Bakers prepared bread. Donkeys dragged carts loaded with goods from distant provinces. Sailors unloaded cargo arriving from every corner of the empire. Politicians gathered supporters. Citizens rushed toward markets. Everywhere, people pushed, shouted, negotiated, argued, and competed for space. Rome never truly slept. Even at night, voices echoed through dark alleyways, while travelers hurried home before trouble found them. Most ordinary Romans lived in apartment buildings known as insulae. These structures rose several stories high and were often built cheaply to maximize profits. Wealthy landlords cared more about collecting rent than ensuring safety. Fires frequently broke out because cooking was done inside cramped rooms using open flames. Buildings sometimes collapsed without warning due to poor construction. Families packed into tiny apartments where privacy barely existed. Water had to be carried upstairs by hand. Waste was often dumped directly into the streets below. Walking through Rome required constant awareness because danger could literally fall from a window above your head. While the poor struggled in overcrowded districts, the wealthy enjoyed an entirely different reality. Senators and aristocrats lived in elegant villas decorated with marble floors, fountains, gardens, and expensive artwork imported from conquered lands. Yet even the rich could not fully escape the city's instability. Outside, their luxurious homes lay streets filled with frustration, poverty, and political tension. Rome's growing population created enormous social problems. Jobs were limited. Food shortages occasionally occurred. Economic inequality widened every year. Thousands of citizens depended on grain distributions simply to survive. Many young men had little opportunity for advancement and spent their days searching for work, entertainment, or anyone willing to offer them money. This created the perfect environment for ambitious politicians seeking loyal followers. The Roman Republic was built upon competition. Politicians competed for offices, influence, and prestige. Generals competed for military victories. Wealthy families competed for power. Every election mattered. Every alliance mattered. Every public appearance mattered. Reputation was everything. A successful politician needed supporters who could cheer his speeches, spread his message, and demonstrate his popularity. Over time, these supporters became more organized. Powerful men gathered large groups of clients, freedmen, laborers, and unemployed citizens who depended on them financially. Loyalty was rewarded with favors, protection, and opportunities. In return, supporters provided public displays of strength. At first, these groups appeared harmless. They accompanied politicians through crowded streets and attended public events. But as political rivalries intensified, their role changed dramatically. Rome lacked a modern police force capable of maintaining order across such a massive city. There were officials responsible for security, but they lacked the manpower necessary to control large crowds. As a result, powerful individuals increasingly relied on their own followers for protection and influence. When one politician appeared with dozens of loyal supporters, rivals felt pressured to do the same. Soon, hundreds of men could gather behind competing leaders. Public spaces became arenas where strength was measured not by arguments, but by numbers. A political debate could quickly transform into a shouting match. A shouting match could become a brawl. A brawl could escalate into full-scale violence. Citizens learned to recognize warning signs, raised voices, gathering crowds, groups moving with purpose through the streets. Experienced Romans understood when it was time to leave an area before trouble erupted. The Forum, the political heart of Rome, became particularly volatile. Here politicians delivered speeches, proposed laws, and addressed the public. In theory, the Forum represented the ideals of the Republic. In practice, it increasingly resembled a battleground where rival factions competed for dominance. Speakers were interrupted, opponents were intimidated, crowds were manipulated. The ability to control public space became almost as important as the ability to persuade voters. Ambitious leaders recognized a simple truth. If your opponents could not safely gather supporters, their influence weakened. If they could not deliver speeches, their message disappeared. If they feared entering certain areas of the city, their power declined. Violence became a political tool, not always openly, but increasingly often. Supporters blocked access to meetings. Rival gatherings were disrupted. Threats became common. The Republic still functioned, but the rules were changing. Rome's political culture had always been competitive, yet now competition extended beyond debate and into the streets themselves. Ordinary citizens found themselves caught between powerful factions. Many simply wanted stability. They wanted affordable food, secure employment, and protection from violence. Instead, they witnessed growing confrontations between ambitious men determined to dominate Roman politics. Each year, tensions increased. Each election carried greater risks. Each political dispute seemed more dangerous than the last. The city was becoming polarized. Loyalty mattered more than compromise. Strength mattered more than cooperation. Public life became increasingly theatrical, with leaders presenting themselves as champions of the people while quietly building networks of supporters prepared to enforce their interests. Few Romans fully understood where this path would lead. They saw only individual conflicts, isolated incidents, temporary crises. Yet beneath the surface, deeper forces were reshaping the Republic. The institutions that had governed Rome for centuries were struggling to adapt to new realities. Wealth, military success, and popular support were concentrating power in the hands of ambitious individuals. Traditional norms weakened. Political opponents became enemies rather than rivals. Violence became normalized. The city that once prided itself on civic participation now increasingly relied upon intimidation and force. The stage was being set for some of the most dramatic confrontations in Roman history. Soon powerful figures would emerge who understood exactly how to exploit this unstable environment. They would build massive followings, challenge established authorities, and transform Rome forever. The Republic stood at a crossroads, balanced between tradition and chaos, between law and violence, between cooperation and conflict. Most citizens could not yet see the storm approaching, but it was already gathering, growing stronger with every political struggle, every street confrontation, and every ambitious leader willing to place personal power above the stability of the state. Ancient Rome remained magnificent, wealthy, and influential. Yet beneath its impressive appearance, cracks were spreading through the foundations of the Republic. Those cracks would soon widen, and when they did, the consequences would change Roman history forever. As Rome drifted deeper into political turmoil, the streets became just as important as the Senate itself. Ambitious politicians quickly realized that controlling public opinion was useful, but controlling public spaces was even better. Among the men who understood this reality better than anyone else was Publius Clodius Pulcher, one of the most controversial and influential figures of the late Roman Republic. Clodius was not born as a champion of the common people. In fact, he came from one of Rome's oldest aristocratic families. Yet he possessed something many nobles lacked: an extraordinary understanding of popular politics. He knew how to connect with ordinary citizens, how to present himself as their defender, and most importantly, how to transform public support into real power. After entering politics, Clodius began building a massive network of loyal followers drawn from the urban population. Many were poor citizens, laborers, freedmen, and young men looking for purpose, protection, or opportunity. To them, Clodius offered something valuable. He promised reforms, challenged powerful elites, and portrayed himself as a man willing to fight for the people against the traditional ruling class. His supporters admired him, trusted him, and followed him with remarkable dedication. But loyalty alone was not enough. Clodius understood that in Rome's increasingly unstable environment, influence required organization. His followers became more than political supporters. They became a force. They attended speeches, filled public assemblies, occupied strategic locations, and ensured that Clodius remained visible wherever important events occurred. If rivals attempted to challenge him, his supporters responded. If opposition gatherings threatened his influence, they intervened. Public meetings became increasingly tense because everyone knew that Clodius's men might appear at any moment. What began as political activism gradually evolved into organized street power. Violence was not always the goal, but it was never far away. Rival politicians soon discovered that opposing Clodius could be physically dangerous. Speakers found themselves interrupted by hostile crowds. Meetings dissolved into chaos. Public officials sometimes struggled to maintain order as competing groups battled for control of the streets. The Forum, once a symbol of civic debate, increasingly resembled an arena where political factions fought for dominance. Clodius's methods were effective because they worked. He gained influence. He passed legislation. He expanded his popularity. Most importantly, he demonstrated that organized supporters could achieve results that speeches alone could not. Other politicians watched carefully and learned a crucial lesson. If Clodius could build a powerful street organization, they needed one too. This realization transformed Roman politics. Rival factions began forming their own groups. Followers became enforcers. Political competition became increasingly physical. Public events required planning not only for speeches, but also for security. Crowds gathered with expectations of confrontation rather than discussion. Citizens attended assemblies knowing that violence could erupt without warning. The Republic's political culture shifted dramatically. Debates still existed, but intimidation became equally important. Persuasion mattered, yet so did strength. In this environment, another powerful figure emerged to challenge Clodius directly. His name was Titus Annius Milo. Unlike many politicians who complained about street violence while benefiting from it indirectly, Milo embraced the reality of the situation. If Clodius possessed organized supporters, Milo would create an organization capable of matching them. If Clodius controlled certain neighborhoods, Milo would challenge that control. If Clodius relied on force, Milo would respond with force of his own. Soon Rome found itself divided between two rival factions, whose hostility seemed to grow with every passing month. Their supporters clashed regularly. What began as verbal arguments often escalated into physical confrontations. Ambushes occurred in narrow streets. Public gatherings ended in fights. Travelers moved cautiously through areas known to be controlled by opposing groups. Businesses sometimes closed early when rumors spread that trouble was coming. Experienced Romans learned how to recognize danger before it arrived. A crowd gathering too quickly. Supporters moving together with unusual purpose. Raised voices echoing across a public square. These signs often meant that violence was only moments away. The rivalry between Clodius and Milo became one of the defining conflicts of the era. Neither man was willing to back down. Each viewed the other as a direct threat to his ambitions. Their supporters adopted the same attitude. Loyalty became personal. Political disagreements transformed into street warfare. Entire sections of Rome experienced repeated disturbances as rival groups competed for influence. Public order deteriorated further. Magistrates struggled to enforce authority. Traditional institutions appeared increasingly powerless. Ordinary citizens watched as organized factions exerted greater control over daily life. Elections became particularly chaotic. Supporters attempted to intimidate opponents. Candidates relied upon loyal followers to protect meetings and influence crowds. Political campaigns resembled military operations more than democratic contests. Success depended not only upon popularity, but also upon the ability to mobilize large numbers of dedicated supporters. The Republic's institutions continued functioning, yet their legitimacy weakened. Citizens began losing confidence in the ability of government to maintain stability. Some longed for stronger leadership capable of restoring order. Others feared that such leadership might threaten the freedoms that Romans cherished. The tension between security and liberty became increasingly difficult to resolve. Meanwhile, violence continued spreading. Clodius and Milo represented more than individual politicians. They symbolized a broader transformation within Roman society. Personal loyalty increasingly outweighed civic responsibility. Organized groups challenged state authority. Political power depended upon influence beyond official institutions. Rome was changing, and not everyone welcomed the change. Yet reversing the trend proved nearly impossible. Every successful act of intimidation encouraged future intimidation. Every victory achieved through force reinforced the belief that force worked. Every confrontation deepened divisions. Citizens became accustomed to instability. Public violence, once shocking, gradually became expected. People adapted. They planned around disturbances. They avoided dangerous areas. They learned which routes were safest and which gatherings posed the greatest risks. The Republic survived, but survival came at a cost. Political norms eroded, trust declined, cooperation became increasingly rare. Beneath the surface, resentment accumulated among competing factions. Rome remained powerful abroad, conquering territories and expanding influence across the Mediterranean. Yet internally, the city struggled with conflicts that seemed increasingly difficult to contain. The rivalry between Clodius and Milo would not remain a series of street fights forever. Eventually, tensions would reach a breaking point. When that moment arrived, it would send shockwaves through the Republic and demonstrate just how far Rome had drifted from the political traditions that once defined it. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of Roman history and reveal the true cost of allowing violence to become a normal part of public life. The breaking point finally arrived on a cold January day in 52 BCE, a moment that would become one of the most infamous political confrontations in Roman history. For years, the rivalry between Clodius and Milo had fueled chaos throughout the city. But until then, their conflict had remained a series of recurring clashes, street battles, and political struggles. Now fate placed both men on the same road at the same time. Clodius was traveling along the Appian Way with a group of supporters when he unexpectedly encountered Milo and his entourage moving in the opposite direction. At first, neither side intended for this meeting to become legendary. It was simply two rival political factions crossing paths. But Rome had spent years normalizing violence. And when violence becomes normal, even small confrontations can quickly spiral out of control. Harsh words were exchanged, insults followed, tempers flared. Within moments, members of the rival groups began fighting. What started as a confrontation between supporters rapidly escalated into a full-scale battle. Weapons appeared. Men charged at one another. Confusion spread across the road. In the chaos, Clodius was wounded and forced to take shelter in a nearby building. At that point, the conflict could still have ended. Instead, it became far worse. According to ancient accounts, Milo's supporters eventually found Clodius and killed him. The death of one of Rome's most powerful and controversial political figures sent shockwaves through the Republic. News traveled quickly. By the time Clodius's body reached Rome, anger was spreading through the city. His supporters were furious. To them, this was not merely the death of a politician. It was the murder of a champion who had fought for ordinary citizens against powerful enemies. Thousands gathered to mourn him. Emotions ran high. Crowds filled the streets. What happened next perfectly reflected the unstable state of Roman society. During the funeral, the crowd became increasingly agitated. The ceremony transformed into a political demonstration. Supporters carried Clodius's body into the Senate House itself, using furniture and wooden benches to build a massive funeral pyre. As flames rose, the fire spread beyond control. The Senate House caught fire and burned, and nearby buildings were damaged as well. One of the Republic's most important political structures was destroyed by a mob driven by grief, anger, and years of accumulated frustration. Rome erupted into disorder. Riots spread through the city. Citizens feared for their safety. Political leaders struggled to restore calm. For many Romans, the destruction symbolized something larger than a single tragedy. It revealed how deeply violence had penetrated public life. The institutions that once maintained order appeared increasingly fragile. The government responded by appointing Pompey, one of Rome's most powerful military leaders, as sole consul to restore stability. This extraordinary reflected the severity of the crisis. Traditional methods no longer seemed sufficient. Strong leadership appeared necessary to prevent complete breakdown. Milo was eventually placed on trial for his role in Clodius's death. The proceedings themselves demonstrated the atmosphere of fear dominating Roman politics. Armed guards surrounded the courtroom. Supporters from both factions gathered nearby. Witnesses felt intimidated. Even the famous orator Cicero, who defended Milo, reportedly struggled to deliver his speech because of the hostile environment. Although Cicero later published a polished version of his defense, the trial ended with Milo's conviction and exile. Yet removing Milo did not solve Rome's deeper problems. Clodius was dead. Milo was exiled. But the culture of intimidation and violence remained. The Republic had spent decades rewarding ambitious individuals who relied upon personal loyalty, organized supporters, and force. Those habits could not disappear overnight. Many citizens began questioning whether the old political system could survive. Public confidence weakened. Factional divisions deepened.